Welcome back. I'm excited to introduce you to Thalys West, an assistant professor at the Department of Environmental Geography and the Institute for Environmental Studies at Veer University in Amsterdam, and a fellow of the Center for Environment and Energy and Natural Resource Governance at the University of Cambridge. Dr. West will explain how remote sensing data has helped him to learn more about deforestation patterns and helped him to investigate a few approaches for reducing deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. So the first question I have for you is, from the perspective of a geographer, why is tropical deforestation a problem?
I don't think the reason why it's a problem is specific, or the reason why geographers or scientists care about deforestation should be any different than why people in general should care about deforestation, right? Because the problems with deforestation affect all of us. If you think about climate change, for example, it affects all of us. And also, even our actions, sometimes they affect deforestation, right? A lot of the products that are produced in tropical regions after you have deforestation are consumed all over the world. Right? A lot of the beef, for example, that comes from Brazil, which is the major driver of land use change, deforestation in the Amazon, they are exported to the US, Europe, China, etc. The same goes for palm oil from Indonesia. So the reason why we should care about deforestation, it's because we are partially oftentimes responsible for it, and because it affects us globally as a community.
Can you tell us more about how deforestation is linked to climate change?
Yes, absolutely. So life on Earth is based on carbon, right? We are based on carbon, and so are the plants and the trees and the forest. So when we cause deforestation, all the biomass, all the carbon in the biomass of the forest gets released, or at least a large part of it gets released into the atmosphere in the form of CO2, right? Carbon dioxide. And that's one of the main greenhouse gases. So the more CO2 we pump into the atmosphere, the worse it is for climate change.
And I know that you do a lot of remote sensing work. So can you tell me about how remote sensing data can contribute to learning about deforestation and contribute to deforestation policy?
So I think using remote sensing and using remote sensing data is absolutely crucial to study deforestation, right? Because when we're talking about deforestation, we're often interested in very large areas, countries, states, even the whole world. For example. And the only way that we can actually map deforestation is relying on remote sensing data. This data can come from satellites or from planes that take photos of the forest, or even drones nowadays. But it's virtually impossible to study or to map deforestation without relying on remote sensing. Right? So most of the data sets that economists, for example, use to evaluate, to study land use change, they come from satellite images. And honestly, there wouldn't be any other way to produce this data for the analysis.
What about your work? How do you use remote sensing in the work that you do?
So my work, it's focused on land use change, particularly in deforestation. And again, I use remote sensing to create the data sets that I need to use in my research. All these data sets, or all the data sets that I use, they come from satellite images. And I use these images to calibrate and then run either simulation models to understand potential future scenarios, maybe policy scenarios that haven't been in place yet, but we could potentially anticipate the impacts of these policies if they were to be in place, as well as using these data sets to run econometric models to understand or estimate the impacts of policies that have already been implemented.
Okay, so let me back up a bit. You said that you use remote sensing to create data sets. So can you give us an example of Like what type of data you create, what type of variables, what type of things go into your models?
It really depends on the type of model that we are running, right? And the type of analysis that we are creating. But if you think about the way the economists in general, they use remote sensing data, what they are interested is in creating a panel data of deforestation. And in this panel data, the observations, of course, you have observations through time, and you have observations for your units of analysis. They could be countries, they could be states within a country, they could be municipalities, they could be independent of any political borders. But you want for most of the econometric models to work, or at least for the models that are based on panel data, you need to put this data together, this panel data together. And the way you do that is by analyzing, processing a number of satellite images in general. So you start by obtaining the images from satellites, classifying them into the land uses that you're interested in, maybe forest and non-forest. And by comparing different satellite images from different years, you can create a data set of deforestation through time. And then it's just a matter of manipulating this data set and calculating some zonal statistics in order to have deforestation rates for your units, right? Meaning either municipalities, for example, or states, so on and so forth.
Where do the data that you work with, say to analyze deforestation in Brazil, where do those data typically come from?
Well, you could download them directly from the source, and the source meaning a specific satellite or a group of satellites. So you can download the raw images of the satellites and classify them and then analyze the classified images.
By downloading them, do you mean downloading them from INPE, from the Brazilian version of NASA?
It could be from NIMPE, but it could also be from the websites of the satellites themselves. So you could download them directly from NASA, for example, right? It depends on the satellite image that you want to use. But usually a lot of these images are publicly available. Some of them you actually have to pay to get access to the satellite images. But usually I work with the freely available satellite images. And to be honest, I don't even actually work with the raw images. I could, but it takes a lot of time to process these images. And nowadays, there are many groups out there around the world, many in the US, that do this for us. They obtain all the images, they classify them, they correct them, and then they make them available. So all this processing and classification step, they are done by other people, and they make these data sets freely available. Now, if for some reason the resolution of these data sets don't work for you, or if they don't cover your research area, or honestly, there could be any reasons for you not to want to use those data sets, then you can do the whole process by yourself. But usually we don't have to do those processes anymore. Someone else or other organizations can do that for us and make them freely available for us to use.
Okay, thanks. And I assume that you use some of that process data in the work that you've done on reduced carbon emissions from avoided deforestation. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. I have a number of studies that look at deforestation, and I'm particularly interested in the effects of this mechanism called REDD+, which stands for Reduced Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. So REDD+ is a carbon-based and performance-based payment for environmental service scheme. And in order to analyze if these REDD+ interventions and programs that are taking place worldwide, if they work, we need essentially deforestation data to evaluate them. right? Because these projects are, again, trying to reduce deforestation. So yeah, usually when I run all my econometric models, the dependent variable is deforestation.
Yeah. And what have you found in your work on this? Has REDD+ been effective in reducing deforestation?
That's a trick question, Joe, because to begin with, REDD+ can exist under a range of ways, meaning under a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have a more centralized version of REDD+, where you have countries, governments in charge of REDD+ programs. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have very decentralized REDD+ initiatives. And these are basically REDD+ type of activities implemented oftentimes in private lands. They are independent from government regulations, so on and so forth. I have focused my work more on the decentralized version of REDD+, evaluating some of these voluntary REDD+ activities. And unfortunately, what my co-authors and I found is that when you create counterfactuals for the REDD+ areas, you don't really see a significant reduction in deforestation in the REDD+ areas. And at the same time, these REDD+ areas, of course, they're part of projects, and these projects are selling a significant number of carbon credits in carbon markets. But the fact is, if these projects are not reducing deforestation, they shouldn't be generating carbon credits because they are not offsetting deforestation, right? So in that sense, our results were not very positive for these voluntary REDD+ initiatives that we evaluated. But again, that said, REDD+ can exist in a number of different forms. We haven't looked at a centralized, national REDD+ programs whatsoever to see if they are working. There are other types of REDD+ initiatives that are, even though they're arguably decentralized, they're not focused on carbon markets. They actually act as more pilot studies, really for us, for scientists to learn more about REDD+, if it can actually work. And some of the evidence from these studies, from these initiatives, suggests that REDD+ can actually work, either at the national level or at the subnational or project level.
Yeah, so I've seen studies on this too, and I think the results that I've seen seem to be more similar to what you've concluded, that so far these REDD payments haven't been really successful in reducing deforestation, but like you're saying, they haven't been extensive. So if we go on that as like something to build on, and we assume that REDD+ isn't very effective, what do you think will be? How do you think that Brazil cracks this nut and solves the deforestation problem?
Honestly, I might be biased, but I would say that the problem is not about the REDD+ as a mechanism from a theoretical perspective. I think the problem that we're finding with some of these REDD+ interventions is with some of the current rules for these interventions to follow and some of the regulations, right? Because right now, these interventions, they need to follow specific methodologies. And I think these methodologies, they are systematically flawed. So that's explaining one of the reasons why we found the results that we found. There's also the issue that some of these initiatives, the way they claim to have started much earlier than the year when they get certified. By the way, all these voluntary private interventions, before they can sell carbon credits in markets or to other people, they seek certification, right? So the certification process involves a third party, auditors go to the field, they check all the calculations, etc. But a lot of these interventions, they might be certified in 1 year, but they claim to have started many years before that. And they do that strategically because then they have this whole gap between project implementation and project certification that they can claim carbon credits from, right? So they do that to be able to sell large amounts of carbon credits once they get the certification. But at the same time, that means that they spend this period between project implementation and project certification without any revenues from the carbon market. So without these revenues, maybe these projects were not able to fully or effectively implement some of the activities that they envisioned to reduce deforestation, right? So, but these things, they happen virtually with all of these voluntary REDD+ projects. And I think that's another problem with these types of activities. So again, I think the REDD+ as an incentive to reduce deforestation, it can work. We just need to make sure that the rules for it to work are the right rules and they make sense. And right now, I think we are still struggling with the rules. And if we do make the rules right, I think REDD+ can work, because I do think that the best way to reduce deforestation is to provide incentives to the stakeholders, to the local stakeholders or the national stakeholders. And REDD+ can do that. It's, in my opinion, humble opinion, it's much better than command and control policies, for example. And it's more fair as well, right? Because it's really easy for us, people that don't live in the middle of the forest, to say that the forest communities cannot cut down trees and sell timber and expand their agricultural land. But a lot of these communities, they rely on that. They need that. So a simple command and control approach, it would be very unfair. And REDD+ can provide them with some incentives to promote conservation.
Oh, that's really interesting. So at the forefront, you think REDD policies are probably what we should be focusing on. How do you think protected areas come into that and the forest code?
I think honestly, those topics are all connected. We do need land use regulations, and the forest code does that. We know that protected areas are effective, and it's a great way to reduce deforestation, right? But at the same time, simply having the laws in place, it doesn't really mean that the local communities, local farmers will pay attention to them and follow them, because a lot of times these laws, they are unfair for them. That's the truth. And we cannot turn the whole Amazon or all the tropical rainforests into a protected area just for the sake of doing so. It's not going to work. We have a lot of communities that rely on the forest, that use the forest, and they will continue to be there. So I do think it's important to have specific areas set as protected areas. I do think, of course, we need land use governance, laws, regulations, etc. But when it comes to changing the behavior of local communities, farmers, etc., I think it's only fair if we do provide them with some incentive to promote conservation. And that's what REDD+ tries to do.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so interesting, because you're the geographer that's promoting the use of these policies, whereas the economists that are part of this course that I've interviewed for it, they are pointing out how important command and control has been in the past and why that's a really important priority for the future. Yeah, so they're diminishing the role that economic incentives should probably play, and they're pointing out that command and control is like you're saying, founded in the forest code. That design, the forest code will tell you how much you can legally deforest and so on. But then the priority list and all the things that went along with it should continue to be priorities. Yeah, do you find that surprising, that conclusion?
Not really. I think it makes a lot of sense. Command and control interventions, they can be very effective, right? But they are also the easy way out. I think the hard way out is by promoting something like REDD+, which it's really hard. It takes a lot of effort. It's a trial and error type of process. But if I'm a believer that if you can get that right, that can also be very effective. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have command and control. Of course, we need that, right? A lot of the agents of deforestation, they're doing illegal things. They know that they're doing that, and they're not going to stop. So we need command and control approaches. But I'm mostly thinking about the farmers, the local communities who are really struggling to survive, essentially, to make enough money to buy food, etc. If you impose restrictions to these groups without offering them an alternative, I think it's very unfair. And then, sure, it would be easier to say, oh, you cannot do this anymore, small farmer. If you do, we're going to fine you or we're going to arrest you. But that's not the best way to promote sustainable development, honestly. And that's why I think, even though REDD+ is hard to implement, hard to make work, I think it's an overall better type of policy to promote than simply command and control.
Thank you, Dr. West. It was interesting to learn how important satellite data is to deforestation research and how these data have been used to address policies like REDD+ and protected areas. Thank you for watching.